Looking back on life, most people eventually have moments where they think, I wish I'd understood that sooner. When you're in your 30s, life often feels like it's moving quickly. We have careers and responsibilities and relationships, and we're trying to build a future. But with a little more time and experience, we begin to see things a little more clearly. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob from Positively Aging, and welcome to the channel. Today, I want to share a few things that I wish I had understood when I was 30. These aren't regrets as much as they are lessons that life tends to teach us all slower than we'd like. When you're 30, you still feel like you have plenty of time to figure everything out. And in many ways, you do. But perspective changes as the years go by. Experience has a way of revealing what truly matters and what truly doesn't. My first point is that time is more valuable than you think. When you're younger, it's easy to assume there will always be plenty of time later. But the years tend to move faster than we expect. Time that's spent with family, friends, and meaningful experiences often become the most valuable investments you can make. And sometimes when we're younger, we take those things for granted. But as we get older, we realize the true value of those moments and what they mean to us internally and externally. My second point is that your health is a long term investment. This is something I've only realized in the last few years, how important it is to take care of your health and constantly monitor it. In my 30s, I felt physically strong and energetic, quite a bit more than I do now. Uh, the habits that we often build during those years shape our health later in life, whether it be smoking or drinking or working out. I mean, anything good or bad, eventually the bill comes due and we have to pay for it in some ways. Um, some of the bad habits we have to correct. And it's, in my case, situations I've had to correct from things I did in my youth that maybe weren't healthy. Um, but there's still time. And, you know, we always have the option, or hopefully we do, to change those things. Taking care of your body early makes a bigger difference than you think at the time. I know I didn't give it much credit at the time, but now that I'm older, I kind of wish I'd been able to go back and do a few things differently. But we work with what we have, and if God has blessed us to be here and be in relatively good health, then we can still make those changes. The third point is that other people's opinions matter less than you think. Now, I've talked about this in several of my other videos too, and it's a common theme, I guess, in the way that we realize that you know what we do has an impact on us, and sometimes that's the only person. But you know, and I'm talking in general instances here, it's easy to spend a lot of energy and time worrying about what other people think. But as we get older, we realize that most people are focused on their own lives anyway. And again, I've brought this subject up before, but it's bears repeating because it is an important part that at least I've realized over the last few years. Living according to your own values tends to matter much more than trying to impress others. Another point that I'd like to make is that I've realized as I get older that relationships require real attention. Um, Friendships and family relationships don't stay strong automatically over the years. We're not guaranteed a solid relationship in, our marriage or our dating life or our family. You have to work at it, and sometimes you have to work pretty hard at it. It all depends on your certain dynamic, but you have to be willing to, I guess, value those relationships and put in the time and the work necessary to keep them strong. And that also means that we sometimes have to change within ourselves and make concessions, understand other people's perspectives. So there's a lot of work that goes into it sometimes, and we realize the value of those relationships as we get older. Looking back, a lot of people probably wish they had invested more energy into the relationships that truly mattered. Um, some people still hold on to relationships that were long lost, but could have been saved. When you get older, you realize that there could have been some things that we did differently. Another point I'd like to make is that failure is often the best teacher. Um, I've definitely learned that lesson over the years. A lot of failures in my life, but I've tried to, as bittersweet as it was, to learn some sort of a lesson from it and hopefully get a little bit stronger from those failures. Um, when I was younger, failure often felt discouraging or even embarrassing. Um, and there's no denying that those two factors come into play. But if we can dig a little deeper, we can get to the supposed lesson that we can learn. Again, that's hard. It's easier said than done because we all take, a failure as a bitter pill. But sometimes that can teach us the biggest lessons in life. And these challenges often shape our resilience, our perspective, and our wisdom. Um, you know, a good example would be when you give advice to your kids or to a younger generation. A lot of times you're speaking of failure when you guide somebody who's asking questions about their future or should they not do something or whatever. A lot of times we tap into our own experiences, and most of the time it's a negative experience when we encourage someone not to do something, because we've been there, we've done that, we know how the game ends, and we know that it usually will always end that way. So that's a lesson that we can pass down to a younger generation based on our own failures. So there's a lot of value to that, as long as you use it. Another point is success isn't always what you expect. And a lot of times when I've succeeded in any area of my life, it's not quite what I dreamed it would be. Sometimes less, sometimes a little more. Um, but I always think of the Rolling Stones song, "You can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need." And life sometimes has a way of doing that and giving you something that you need. Maybe it's not over top dramatic success, but sometimes you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. Early in our life, success often looks like achievements, recognition, or financial progress. But as time goes by, the definition of success often becomes more personal. Peace of mind, meaningful relationships, and balance often become far more important. I know in my own life that is true, very true. Another point is that simple moments are easy to overlook. When you're busy building a career or chasing goals, it's easy to overlook ordinary moments. But later in life, these simple experiences often become the memories that matter the most. It's funny how life works out that way. Simple things like a quiet morning or conversation with a friend or time spent outdoors can hold deeper meaning than we often realize at the time. Those are things that, as a 30-year-old, I probably never even really thought of very much. And if you do, then, if you're watching this and you're in your 30s, or you can remember back to when you were in your 30s and you did do that, then kudos. But I took a lot of things for granted that, you know, was one of the reasons why I decided to start this channel, was to talk about some of those things and how odd it is how our perspective changes over time. And I guess to kind of unpack some things that I thought I would share with other people that might feel the same way. Another point is that self acceptance comes with time. In your 30s, many of us are still trying to prove ourselves in different areas of life. As we mentioned earlier, relationships, career, all those other areas. You know, as we get older, we begin to understand that perfection isn't really necessary. Accepting who we are tends to bring a level of confidence that's much more peaceful than constant comparison. I know in my case, it took me a while to kind of be happy with myself. I was always chasing other things and feeling like I needed to be something that I wasn't. And that caused a lot of consternation on my part sometimes. But when you finally get to the realization that you're okay with who you are and what you have, then that's a great weight off your shoulders. Another point is that life doesn't follow a perfect timeline. Many people assume that life should unfold according to a specific schedule. I know we make goals and to-do lists and stuff, and how many of us, I wonder, achieve everything on those lists? I know I'm notorious for making lists, but notorious for also never finishing a list. It gives me a framework, I guess, some guides, but rarely do I finish everything, and even more rare do I finish everything in the way that I instructed, you know, wrote it down on paper. So, and I feel like a lot of people are in that same boat. Reality looks different. When you look back at those goals or those to-do lists, you might think, dang, that worked out, but it didn't quite work out the way I thought it would going into this whole thing. And that's okay in most cases, because everyone's path moves at its own pace. And learning to accept that can remove a lot of unnecessary pressure. In closing, life doesn't have to be filled with regrets. We can look back on a lot of our experiences with fondness, and we can also recognize the wisdom that it brings us. Yeah, I wish I had thought of a lot of things when I was 30 and looked at life a little bit differently, but I am grateful for the wisdom that it's created and the perspective it's created as I get older. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your comments below, and please like and subscribe. We've got way more coming up, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.